I'm Michael Adams. I'm one member of the SFPA, and first I'd like to thank the founders and co-founders of SFPA. Would you stand or wave your hand and ask the audience to join me in thanking you for putting this program together. This is one of the newest and active police watchdogs in our city. And if you'll pay attention to the overhead, the hashtag changes SFPD, that's a way of gathering more information. Please take that down and keep it in your index. Also, we want to acknowledge and pay the utmost respect to those groups who have led the way, and we deeply appreciate how you have included us in your efforts to broaden this movement. We thank you for your leadership over many years, and today is our way of doing our part to help the cause. So for those of you who have been in this fight for a long time, we acknowledge that, we recognize that, and we thank you for that. So if you would join me in giving yourselves a big round of applause. We'll introduce our families in a few minutes, but first we have a very short video here.
Failing to signal a lane change.
Riding in your girlfriend's car with a child in the back.
Run into the bathroom in your own apartment.
Selling cigarettes outside of a corner store.
Riding a commuter train.
Walking home with a friend.
Making eye contact.
Selling CDs outside of a supermarket.
Wearing a hoodie.
Walking away from police.
Walking toward police.
Missing a front license plate.
Holding a fake gun in the park in Ohio.
Driving with a broken brake light.
Sitting in your car before your bachelor party.
Walking up the stairwell of your apartment building.
Calling for help after an accident.
Holding a fake gun in Virginia.
On the way to Bible study.
Holding a fake gun in Walmart.
Laughing.
Holding a wallet.
For attending a birthday party.
Doing absolutely nothing.
Not servile enough. Go to weareheremovement.com to tell President Obama and Congress that the time for change is now. We demand radical transformation to heal a long history of systemic racism so that all Americans have the equal right to live and to pursue happiness.
We just take 10 seconds and pause just to remember and reflect. Thank you. Don't worry about the voices of children. They're the generation we're here for, so
we're gonna fix it.
Keep them in the room, please. Okay.
Donald Trump having problem with children.
This event will have three parts. First, a conversation with our five families, and families are assembled on the stage. Now, each of our families has an important story to tell. They are the reality of our police accountability problem, locally and nationally. Then we will have a panel discussion with experts on how to implement much needed transformational change. The emphasis here is on implementation, not just problem description, but implementation of these changes. Finally, we will break for lunch and allow everyone to socialize and, importantly, to join organizations who have come to shake hands, mingle, get to know you, and invite you to join if you're not already a member of 4 or 5 organizations, like many of you are. There will be an opportunity to mingle, trade notes, and catch up with each other. We see this as an opportunity to continue to be involved in the difficult and vital work of transforming the SFPD into a force that reflects our values and that eventually we can trust and eventually respect. So let's begin. I'm going to turn it over to Dolores Piper, member of the San Franciscans for Police Accountability, and the great aunt of Derek Gaines. Derek was killed by South San Francisco police in 2010.
Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to introduce all of our panel here, and then they will begin their stories here from left to right. First, we have Dina Abello, and her husband, James Nate Greer, was killed on May 23rd, 2014. And she will explain all of that to you. We next have Kadeen Williams, and her brother, O'Shane Evans, was killed here in San Francisco on October 7th, 2014. And we will be commemorating that event again this year. It will be 2 years. The mother of O'Shane is also in the audience taking care of her grandchild, and that's Angela Nagy, and she has been a great support to everyone as well. Next, we have Luis Putpat, and he is the cousin to Luis Gongara Pat, who was killed here in San Francisco on the 7th of April, 2016. We have the cousin to Luis Gongara, Carlos Putpat, and we also have the brother to Luis Gongara, Jose Manuel Putpat. Translating for us, if necessary, is Maria Vialta. She herself is an activist in her own right and has supported all of these families and organizations. We have the story of Amilcar Perez Lopez, also killed in San Francisco on February 26, 2015. Telling his story is his neighbor, Florencia Rojo. And last, I will tell you the story of my great-nephew, Derek Gaines, who was killed in South San Francisco on June 5th, 2012. And I will be able to link that with San Francisco because that police officer is now on your police department here in San Francisco. So I will begin with Dina, and she can tell you briefly her story.
Hi, my name is Dina Abello, and James Greer was my husband. I was going to read you a little story that I wrote in his words because his killing was caught on camera, on the body cam. He was pulled over May 23rd, 2014 for driving what the lieutenant said was goofy. He was making a left-hand turn, the light took too long, so he proceeded straight, which I do all the time and I see a lot of people do it, but it caused him his life. So that since it was on video, we were able to see what happened and kind of get it in his words. There was about 20 officers on scene at the time when he died. And he was basically pulled over. He complied in doing a field sobriety test. He was then told to walk around the other side of the vehicle to complete the sobriety test on flat ground. As he proceeded to close his eyes, he noticed that there was several officers surrounding him. At that time, we counted on the video about 6. He asked what was going on. He was confused. He asked if he was under arrest. The lieutenant who pulled him over said no. He was then pulled to the ground by BART police who somehow showed up and was tackled and dogpiled on for about 10 to 15 minutes at this point, we lost count at 17 officers. He then was face down on the ground. Officers were sitting on him. About 7 officers sitting on his back, his arms, his legs. His head was being stepped on by another officer who then stuck his baton between his neck and the ground and wedged it in his throat, cutting off his breathing. At that time, there were several other officers tying up his feet in what they call a body wrap. And during that time, 2 officers were tasing him. He stopped breathing, and the officers rolled him over onto his back. An officer noted that his lips were blue and discolored. No one checked his pulse. No one administered CPR. They continued to wrap him in that body restraint as he was not breathing and unconscious. They then slumped him over to the side for 7 minutes before the paramedics showed up while he was not breathing and let him die. In the video you show the police officers talking amongst each other and laughing and telling jokes about how big he was. He had lost a ring in the scuffle and they were asking whose ring it was. One of the officers said it was his, and they went on telling jokes about his ring, saying it was a mood ring, let's go put it on him and see what kind of mood he's in now. And another officer said black. An officer lost his hat in the scuffle, and they found it underneath my husband's body when they picked him up. And the officer said, oh, he probably doesn't want it anymore because James was using it as a pillow. So they were joking and laughing the whole time. He's sitting there not breathing. To me, we pay these people to help us, to protect us, to serve us, and they did nothing to help him at any point. Whether he was pulled over for driving goofy, it's not a death sentence. And at the point when he was not breathing, I feel someone out of these 20 plus officers should have helped. I would like to see them all be held accountable, because although they may not have taken a part in what they call dogpiling on him, they watched him die. And some of them didn't even watch, they just let him die. They didn't even pay attention to him. It was like he wasn't there. So it's real disheartening to see them laughing and joking when this man is literally turning blue. So with that being said, my children, we have 2 children together. We have a 28-year-old daughter and a 22-year-old son, and we have 2 grandchildren. And they're not doing too good. You know, it's tough every single day. My son, being 22, he just works and works and works and works, and he's disassociated from life. He's not happy. He lost his joy. He lost his best friend. My grandkids don't have their grandfather. My grandson's 10, and he draws pictures in school of his grandfather getting killed. And he doesn't sleep well. None of us really do. So it's just really tough. They don't think about what they do to these families. And there's a panel here of people who, there's a very small amount of people who can testify to that. And they don't care unless they're reprimanded somehow. And in our case, he was killed in Hayward, which is Alameda County. During that time, he did not have to report, the police did not have to report the death because he wasn't shot. He was tased 3 times. And it went unaccounted for because there was no investigation because of the lack of reporting. So that's been changed. And hopefully we get this change to continue and keep happening, because it's just happening far too much. And I don't see it stop. But I thank you guys for listening.
Hello. Hi, my name is Kadeen Williams. I'm the sister of O'Shane Evans.
It's all right, I know.
Yeah.
It's all right.
On December 9th, 1992, I'll never forget, we came here from Jamaica. just hoping and praying that life would be better. Right? Like we left one property to come to a property all over again. And my brother is the youngest of 5 of us. I remember my mother first brought him home from the hospital. He was a premature baby. He came a long way. Doctors say he wouldn't make it. You could hold him in one hand, he was so tiny. But he made it, and he survived. And on October 7th, 2014, I wish I was there, but to save him, but Shane was sitting in his mother's car. He borrowed his mother's car to take his friends to San Francisco. His friends asked him for a ride. He came over to San Francisco because we live in Oakland. And he was sitting in his car talking on his phone, because I checked the phone records. Because around the time that they said that he got shot, he was on his phone. Officer walked up to his car. They say they were watching, there had been surveillance in the area about some break-ins of cars. They said his friend took a laptop from a car and ran back to O'Shane's car. And when he got to O'Shane's car, first he said that he had a shootout with O'Shane. Then he said that O'Shane had a gun on his lap. O'Shane did not have a gun. He had a little black phone that he never left. Just a little piece of phone. O'Shane was talking on his phone, because I checked the phone records, and around the time that he got killed, he was talking to his friend on his phone. I remember getting up to use the restroom around 2 o'clock, and I was wondering, my phone didn't run, but I didn't answer because I went straight to the restroom, and I was wondering, why is my mother calling me this late? And then I called her back, and I could hear her crying. It's something that I will never forget for the rest of my life. It gives me nightmare, because I still hear her crying. There's a crying that she said, at San Francisco police killed O'Shane. And she said, they killed my baby. They killed my baby. I think it hurt me more to see her going through what she's going through than even hurt myself. It's not a good feeling to see her mother, the cry that she cries. Her baby's not coming home. Her baby will never come home. Regardless of what the matter was out there that day, if his friends were breaking in the car, and it was not a death sentence. O'Shane had never been to jail. He didn't have anything to lose. I mean, you know, it's not like he was going to, if they caught him doing something, he was going to go to jail, or he's going to do time, or it was a death sentence. He's never been to jail. You know, they brought up a juvenile record from when he was a juvenile. You know, O'Shane was trained to become a boxer. He had hurt his hand training, and that same day when he died, he went to his trainer and said, I'll be back, I feel better, I'll be back. You know, and he was real good at what he did. But he never made it back. He never made it back. David Goff, until this day, we have not seen a picture. We have gotten promises from Chief Sir, from Tony Chaplin. You know, they always, because we're a black family, they send a black officer out to calm us down because they think that will calm us down. They lie to us. They said his friends set him up. And what purpose would it be for his friends to set him up? You know? Tony Chaplin, oh, your son wasn't supposed to die, you know, he wasn't, you know, it's just a whole bunch of bull. And we've been fighting since, you know. You don't hear too much about O'Shane, but, you know, we carry O'Shane. Well, before I get off here, I want to say, you know, instead of wasting our time going off with these officers, we need to go after this system.
Yes.
Because the system allows these officers to kill our loved ones. Oh, we can say we can reform these officers. Forget a reform? We need to go after, what is a reform?
All right.
You know, what is a reform? We need to go after the system, because the system is backing these officers.
Right.
And without the system, these officers will not be here.
That's right.
Thank you.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Luis Armando Potpat. Soy primo.
Good morning, my name is Luis Hermano Bat.
Soy primo del Luis Demetrio Góngora Pat, que lo mataron el día 7 de abril del 2016.
I'm the cousin of Luis Demetrio Gongarapat that was killed on April 7th, 2016.
Voy a leer un párrafo para
I'm going to read a paragraph.
Luis Demetrio Góngora Pat nació en Tiago, Yucatán, en el 25 de abril de 1970. Él tenía 45 años en el momento de su muerte. Luis era maya yucateco. Lo sobreviven su esposa y 3 hijos mayores, así como sus padres en Yucatán, México. En San Francisco le sobreviven hermanos y primos, y la familia lo llama Luis o por su apodo de cariño Sapo.
Luis Demetrio Gongarapat was born in Tabo, Yucatan on April 25th, 1970. He was 45 years old at the time of his death. A Yucatecan Mayan, he is survived by his spouse, 3 grown children, and his elderly parents in Yucatan, Mexico. Luis is also survived by brothers and cousins in San Francisco. His family called him Luis, or by his nickname Sapo.
El día 7 de abril de 2016 a las 10 de la mañana, el sargento Nate Sheger y el oficial Michael Maloney primero dispararon 4 bolsas llenas de gomas, seguidos de 7 balazos hacia Luis Demetrio Góngora Pat. Él era un hombre maya mexicano que vivía sin hogar en un campamento en la calle Chapel, en la calle 18 y la 19, en el distrito de la Misión, aquí en San Francisco. En 30 segundos transcurridos, en los momentos que los oficiales llegaron, el momento que Luis fue muerto.
On April 7, 2006, at 10:04 a.m., Sergeant Nate Seeger and Officer Michael Malone first fired 4 beanbag shots, followed immediately by 7 bullets at Luis Demetrio Gongarapat. He was a Mayan Mexican living in a homeless encampment on Shotwell Street between 18th and 19th in the Mission District of San Francisco. 30 seconds transpired between the moment that officers arrived on scene and the moment that they killed Luis.
De acuerdo a todos los testigos entrevistados, él se encontraba sentado en el suelo atendiendo sus asuntos cuando los oficiales lo confrontaron brutalmente. Una cámara de seguridad captó cómo los oficiales disparaban hacia el suelo, indicando que Luis se encontraba en el suelo cuando le mataron. Una autopsia independiente ordenada por los abogados de la familia comprueba un tiro mortal con trayectoria hacia abajo en la cabeza de Luis.
By all witness accounts, he was sitting on the ground minding his own business when officers brutally engaged him. A surveillance camera video captures the officers shooting towards the ground, indicating that Luis was on the ground when killed. An independent autopsy ordered by the family lawyers revealed a fatal downward shot into Luis's head.
Nosotros somos indígenas mayas,
We're indigenous Mayans,
emigrantes que venimos a tratar de trabajar y ayudar a nuestras familias.
we're immigrants who come here to work to try to help our families.
Y tenemos mucha discriminación aquí.
And we have a lot of discrimination here.
Y el sapo o mi primo nunca pudo regresar a ver a su familia de vuelta.
And Sapo, my cousin, was never able to return and see his family.
Y hasta la fecha que vamos a cumplir 6 meses, nadie nos ha dado una respuesta de nada.
And to this day, 6 months later, nobody has given us a response to anything.
ninguna información de parte de la policía o de nadie aquí en San Francisco.
No information by the police or any officials from San Francisco.
Y estamos buscando justicia para mi primo y le pido por favor a los representantes de San Francisco que hagan algo por los muertos, de todos los muertos que la policía mata, que es asesinato, nunca ayudan, destruyen las familias y las comunidades en el barrio de la Misión. Muchas gracias.
So we're just asking for justice for all our deceased, all the ones that have fallen victim to shootings. We're asking for city officials to help because at this moment they do not help. Sorry, I forgot the last part. Yeah, they don't help, and we're asking for justice for all of us.
Primeramente, buenos días a todos ustedes.
First, good morning to you all.
Yo soy José Manuel Góngora Pat. Soy hermano de Luis Demetrio Góngora Pat, que fue asesinado el 7 de abril en la Shadow en la 19 por la policía.
My name is Juan Manuel Góngora Pat. I'm the brother of Luis Demetrio Góngora Pat that was shot on April 7, 2016 on Shotwell Street.
Y quiero pedirles que nos hagan justicia en el nombre de Luis Demetrio Góngora Pat.
I'm asking that they give justice on the behalf of Luis Góngora Pat.
Y mi madre, que está sufriendo mucho, también está pidiendo lo mismo para decirle a la gente que me está apoyando que pida lo mismo, justicia para Luis.
And my mother, who's also suffering, is asking for the same, for support and justice for Luis Góngora Pat.
Yo como hermanito de él y mis primos, los que estamos aquí, entonces venimos para que nos ayuden para pedir justicia.
As a brother and my cousins who sit beside me, we're here to ask you to help us get justice for Luis.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Carlos Potpat, primo del conde de Luis Demetrio Góngora Pat.
Good morning, my name is Carlos Popat. I'm the cousin of Luis Góngora Pat.
Nada más quería agregar algunas cosas que sucede aquí, la forma como mataron a mi primo, una tremenda injusticia, prácticamente un asesinato.
I wanted to add some details to what happened here. Not just a homicide, it was murder.
Eso es un asesinato que no puede quedar impune, especialmente viniendo de la policía, que como muchos de ustedes saben, algunos son buenos, algunos son malos, pero desgraciadamente si no hacemos justicia o no buscamos la justicia o no se les castiga, esto va a continuar, y no solamente con nosotros, sino con los futuros niños que están viniendo aquí atrás, que nosotros por ejemplo podemos educar a ser los mejores de lo que ya son.
I just wanted to add that the police cannot continue to have impunity, and they cannot continue without punishment because it will not change if they are not punished. All this will not end, and our children who are here will be victims of the next murder.
Y les pido a todos ustedes que nos ayuden y nos apoyen para buscar esta justicia, que va a ser muy difícil. La policía todo el tiempo se justifican porque tienen el poder en las manos. La corrupción que existe en ellos, porque nunca se les hace justicia, nunca se les castiga.
We ask for support and help to receive justice because the police are basically that they're giving the power, and they're allowed to do this. So without making changes, we need to have some kind of justice.
Y esto sigue sucediendo. Ustedes ven las noticias, lo escuchan en la televisión y en muchas partes cómo matan a la gente morena, a la gente latina. ¿Por qué existe mucha discriminación aquí?
You guys can hear on TV, and I'm pretty sure you've heard on TV how they kill black and brown people, or black and Latinos, because there's a lot of discrimination here.
Y los que sufren son las familias, los niños, los hijos de los que matan, o los familiares son los que sufren, quedan traumados. Es difícil recuperarse de una muerte de un familiar.
And the ones that are suffering are the families, the children. They're the ones that are left behind are the ones that are suffering because of the death of their family.
Y les pido a todos ustedes, esos que tienen algo de ley o poder en las manos, o que puedan ayudar, vamos a buscar justicia. Hay que castigar a los culpables de que cometen un asesinato.
And I ask those who have power or power of the law beside them to help us fight for justice.
Gracias.
Hi, good morning. My name is Florencia Rojo, and first I just want to say thank you, and I feel very honored to be here at this table surrounded by all these family members. Amilcar Perez Lopez was my neighbor. He doesn't have family here in the United States, so I'm going to tell a little bit about him on their behalf. So we really see the human toll that these shootings have and the ripple effects they have on families and communities. But I really want to say thank you to all the families that are able to be here. Amilcar Perez Lopez was 17 years old when he came to this country from Guatemala. He was also an indigenous Mayan. He was Maya Chorti. He came here with just a couple $100 to his name. His family sent him. And I often ask myself, what did they imagine that his life would be in the United States? I think about what I know about Guatemala, the community that he came with, that he came from. His parents imagined a society that would be safer from violence, a society with less corruption from the state. And I wonder what it must be like for them not only to experience this loss, but to experience it from afar. We haven't been able to even get his father a visa to come here. So it's been very, very difficult, this cause without a family. Amilcar worked a lot of jobs. He worked construction. He worked in restaurants all over the Mission and all over San Francisco. He worked as a carpenter. He's worked in airports, and I often say this when I talk about him, that many of us, even if you didn't know him personally, probably came across him in some way, probably were affected by him in some small way. And I know that's true for a lot of the people who are at this table, that folks who, immigrants who run the kitchens and the restaurants that we eat, folks who are in the neighborhood. So I think he really has touched all of our lives. He sent that money home to his family. He had two parents in Guatemala and 5 younger siblings, and they lived off of the remittances that he sent them. So he was supporting a family of 7 back home. And so it's an enormous loss for them emotionally, the loss of their loved one, and also this great loss of their income. He was able to send enough money that they managed to get electricity in their home. He had dreams of going back and building his mother a house. So he really worked very hard for his family, like so many immigrants in this country. And he did create a chosen family here in the United States, even though his family was back home. He had roommates that were like family to him. He had a coworker who was like a big brother to him. He had a girlfriend who he loved very much. He was someone who would cook dinner for his friends. If someone came home and they hadn't eaten yet, he would take care of them. One of his housemates was very, very sick, and he would go to the hospital and take care of him when others wouldn't. So he was really a very dedicated friend and family member in many ways, in many communities. And he's missed by transnational communities. I mean, he's missed by all of us. And he was also, so he's working jobs. He was also a student. He wanted to learn English. He wanted to be able to do more here. And so I just wanted to say that to give a little bit of context about who he was. On February 26th of last year, 2015, just a little over a year and a half ago, Amilcar was having a disagreement with someone, and somehow that ended up in him getting shot. He was shot 6 times from behind by officers Craig Tiff and Eric Rivoli. And it was, if any of you were at the community meeting that we had with SFPD, we know that the police had their initial story of what happened. They claimed that he was lunging at them with a knife, and that they feared for their safety, which we know are the magic words that the police say. They feared for their lives, and so they shot him. Since they told that story, which is a complete fabrication, there have been 2 different autopsies. The lawyer for the civil suit representing the family had an independent autopsy done, and then the medical examiner had an autopsy done, and both showed that he was shot 6 times from behind. So we know that they're lying. The district attorney, who has been stringing us along after over a year and a half of supposedly investigating this case, still has not brought any charges to these officers, and so we're asking the Attorney General to indict these officers. But, and I know I have to wrap up, I just want to say that just echo what others have said about larger systemic changes. We're pushing this specific case, but we know that our systems are flawed, and so we have to not only win through the judicial system, but we have to win the story. And I just want everyone to remember who Amilcar was. Thank you.
Again, I'm Dolores Piper, and my great-nephew, Derek Gaines, was killed in South San Francisco when he was 15 years old. Just a brief summary of who he was. When he was born here at UC Hospital, and he was born with several impairments, physical impairments, and so the poor little guy started, he had cleft feet, and he had a cleft palate, and he had speech problems, and so he started therapy very young. And when he was about 1 year old, my husband and I took him into our home in South San Francisco, and we raised him for the duration until he was killed by a cop. My husband retired from his job, and he took him on as a full-time companion, and they had a wonderful, wonderful time together, but it was interspersed with scores of occupational therapy, physical therapy, doctor's visits, pediatricians, on it went. But he was a charming little child, and he took it all in stride and developed into a very lovable kid. When he was 8 years old, we had to take him to Boston, where my husband underwent a treatment for a disease that was largely unknown, and I flew 5 people across country to take care of Derek, and they were totally charmed with him. They did all the Boston area while I took care of the protocols for my husband. My husband died when Derek was 8 years old, and people reminded me, which I didn't realize, that at the gravesite, his head was on my shoulder, comforting me. He was my little strength. And he asked me after that, "Auntie, are we going to be all right?" And I said, "Derek, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. Just you and I." And so it was Derek and me for the duration. I took him to all my work events, all my work. People knew him. I took him all kinds of trips. I took his friends to plays and museums and had them over for, parties, and so it was a joyous time for me with this child. And so I say nephew loosely because he was really my son. On June 5th, 2012, school had been out for about 5 days in South San Francisco. I was in Sacramento doing a food show that day, and he was munching around with his friends, and he happened to be with a 14-year-old friend of his, and they were it was about 7:30 at night, and they had been at McDonald's, and they were munching around kind of at loose ends. They went to the bus stop, tried to get a bus, and they called me, Auntie, when are you going to be home? I'm not home yet, blah, 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 blah. And they decided, we'll go back to McDonald's, and they cut through the Arco station, and a police vehicle had come up and was watching all this, kind of dithering back and forth. And I know my nephew probably looked over his shoulder and said, ooh, there's a cop over there. And so this cop swooped into the gas station. All these people pumping gas, full of, it was a nice evening, 7 o'clock at night. People driving by saw him, even spoke to him. And when the police officer stopped the two boys, he got out and he asked them what they were doing. I said, we're not doing anything. But my nephew stepped back and he turned and he ran. And so he was hit over the head with the officer's gun and he fell to the ground. And at the time he fell to the ground, a weapon scattered out from his belongings. He had it underneath his clothing. It scattered out onto the tarmac. He continued to run away from that. And the officer cornered him at the fencing at the Arco station. Decided that because there was a weapon over here on the tarmac, I need to kill this guy. He's a danger. And so he put the gun right to his throat as I read the investigative report and fired. Wow. He wanted to get off a second shot, but his gun jammed. I don't believe, in South San Francisco, they rushed him to General Hospital here in San Francisco. I don't think he was alive at that time. When I went to General to finally get the records, he died there as a John Doe. My nephew that I raised died there as a John Doe. They couldn't find the file. And when they did find it, they brought it out to me. Said there'll be no charge for this. What? There'll be no charge for this file. I realized later that they had tried to save him there, but they had used him basically as a training for what you would do in that kind of situation. There was a huge outpouring in South San Francisco for this young man. He was a diplomat. If he could have talked himself out of it that night, he would have, but I don't think he thought he could talk himself out of that, so he decided he should run. The woman here who didn't feel that she should share maybe her story today, Lee Stackpole, she and I became entwined 6 or 7 months ago because this police officer left South San Francisco Police Department and he became a San Francisco police officer. But on April 10th in 2015, he assaulted her biracial son on Mission Street. He was just graduating from Fordham University with an art degree. This kid had never come up against the cops before. And this police officer assaulted him, arrested him because he was coming home late at night from a gig with some friends. She, his white mother, went to the Valencia at the Missions Police Department and said, what have you done? She was horribly mistreated by Officer Cabillo, Joshua Cabillo, who killed my nephew, who assaulted her son, and Vice President of the POA, Montoya, Tony Montoya. She could do nothing. Her son has been so traumatized by this. She didn't want to be here today. She says, after all, my son didn't die. I said, really? He was lucky. Maybe he could have. It could have escalated that night. She felt like she shouldn't express this, but she eventually sold her little home she had bought on Valencia Street. She's moving out of the area. He went back to New York to try to get over this, but he was deeply traumatized. And that's another issue. Assaults on our children may not result in death, but they are trauma nevertheless.
Thank you, Dolores. Thank you, families. We'd like to recognize the Alex Nieto families in the room. Would you please... I'd like to offer heartfelt thanks to the families who shared your grief. It's one thing to read about this, isn't it? It's another thing to hear it directly from the families. And we can't honor you enough for your courage and your willingness to share the pain that you've experienced so that we can embrace that and use that as a motivation to continue this fight. We follow your lead in trying to find strength to keep going and fight for the institutional and systemic changes, as several of you have mentioned. It's not just one bad cop here and one bad cop there, it's the system, and we agree with you. And so we do this at the beginning so that we can get the context in our minds and our hearts to move forward with you, so that we can, sounds cliche, prevent this from happening again to someone else. So thank you. We can't say enough respect and honor to you for what you have shared with us.
I'm going to read a couple of key quotes from the Blue Ribbon panel, and I think all of you received a quick summary. We encourage you to read the whole thing. Don't get overwhelmed. It is 250 pages long, and there's 81 recommendations, but we need, as was pointed out, to get systemic change, we need comprehensive change, and that's exactly what the folks on the Blue Ribbon panel have provided us with, a detailed, actionable blueprint of what needs to change to make SFPD accountable. And we urge you, as you're out there, if you tweet or post, this is the hashtag for today's event, change SFPD. Please, please tweet that thing. Here's a couple of key quotes. It is common sense that a law enforcement agency can have the best policies in the world, but if its institutional culture doesn't support them, they won't work. The incoming SFPD chief must have the vision and leadership skills to address the department's institutional culture. He or she must have the dedication to implement 21st century policing best practices. And neither the chief nor the director of the Office of Civilian Complaints sent a sustained complaint to the Police Commission, the only body that can impose discipline of a suspension greater than 10 days through termination between the end of 2012 and 2015. And the OCC, that's supposed to be our voice, that's supposed to represent us, Office of Civilian Complaint, has not sustained a complaint of biased policing since it began reporting it in 2012. Not a single complaint. These realities, combined with the lack of detailed information available to the public about the investigation of complaints or the imposition of discipline, contribute to a public perception that the OCC and Police Commission are not effective oversight bodies. This perception is certainly shared by the members of San Francisco's for Police Accountability.
Hi, my name is David Carlos Oliveri, and I'm one of the 7 or 8 founders of San Franciscans for Police Accountability. I'd like first of all to introduce our panel. Thank you all so much for coming on this Saturday. Judge Ladora Cordell was one of 3 retired judges on the Superior Court of California who led the Blue Ribbon panel. She is a former independent police auditor for the city of San Jose and an advocate for improving transparency into charges of police misconduct. So thank you, Judge. John Crew is a police practices expert and former ACLU attorney. John Crew is in the background doing a tremendous amount of stuff that's very important work. And he's very much an expert on police accountability. We also have with us today Anand Subramanian, who leads Policy Link's efforts to advance community-centered policing, including serving as the executive director of the San Francisco Blue Ribbon Panel on Transparency, Accountability, and Fairness in Law Enforcement. Thank you for being here, Anand. Alex Salazar is a former LAPD police officer and a private investigator in LA. He developed PTSD as a result of a violent incident during his policing career and is determined to help officers prevent and cope with this disorder. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Ray Marshall is an attorney and partner at Shepard Mullen who served in a pro bono capacity on the Blue Ribbon panel, leading its investigation into SFPD culture. He is a past president of the California Bar Association and of the San Francisco Bar Association. Thank you, Ray, for being here. Mawuli Tubenio is a legislative aide for Supervisor Malia Cohen. Supervisor Cohen moved at the Board of Supervisors meeting on September 20th, just a week ago, to hold a hearing on the Blue Ribbon panel before the entire Board of Supervisors at its October 4th meeting at 3 p.m. Hope everybody shows up for that. They're going to vote on that next week. We expect a unanimous vote from the board. The motion will be voted on September 27th. Thank you for being here, Mawuli. Christine Soto DeBerry, as my compatriot said, the Chief of Staff for DA Gascon. Thank you for being here. So Claire, you want to kick it off with the first question?
Sure. And I'd also like to acknowledge that we invited Chief Chaplain to serve on the panel, and he declined because of family engagement. And we also invited Daniel Mohammed from the Justice for Mario Woods Coalition, and similarly he declined because he had a family engagement. But we're so grateful for all of you for being on the panel. And we are, although we have our differences with District Attorney George Gascon, we want indictments and convictions of all killer officers. Extremely grateful to District Attorney George Gascon for creating the Blue Ribbon panel, and we want to work hard on getting its recommendations implemented. So on that note, I'd like to ask Judge Cordell, you have deep experience in police reform and personal experiences of racism, including a late-night mistaken identity stop by cops hiding behind patrol car doors with shotguns and pistols aimed at you and two black male companions. Given the political moment, Black Lives Matter, cell phone video killings on a regular basis, what can San Francisco do to implement the Blue Ribbon Report rapidly? Does it fall mostly on the new chief, or is there a role for the Board of Supervisors, the Police Commission, and the mayor?
Thank you for the question. Thank you all for being here. Those who are ignorant of their history are doomed to repeat it.
All right.
So what I want to do initially is just take a very few minutes to talk about history. From 1937 to 2016, a period of 79 years, there were documented 19 major incidents involving San Francisco police officers, use of excessive force, and in one instance, in discrimination. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what happened over those 79 years. I'm going to start in 1937, excuse me. And I'm not going to go through each of these, but I want to give you the kinds of misconduct that came to light and had great public reaction. There were many uses of excessive force, and I'm going to give you some examples. There was Fajita Gate, where 3 officers off duty assaulted 2 civilians, which resulted in them getting a settlement, a financial settlement paid by the city. There was an instance where Dolores Huerta was beaten by a police officer using a baton, which resulted in yet another major settlement, a payout of your tax dollars to settle that case. There were riots that were in many instances provoked by the police in the aftermath of the Dan White verdicts that came out. There was rioting. That was a lawsuit was filed against the SFPD in the aftermath of how they handled the protests in the aftermath of the verdict, and officers were actually fired. There were just a number of incidents. There was also in 1979 a consent decree that was entered into by and compelled by a federal court judge. The consent decree lasted for 25 years, from 1979, and was not lifted until 1998. And that was 25 years of litigation. And as a result of the settlement, the agreement that the city reached with those who had filed the lawsuit were that the city pledged that 45% of all new recruits to the police department would be people of color. Hasn't happened. All right, but this was a consent decree. So, in response to 79 years where there have been a variety of incidents, I missed one. One was the video gate, where a police officer, his name was Cohen, created some video clip parodies making fun of African Americans, of women, of gays. He was eventually, he was not even fired for that. He was suspended. He eventually resigned from the force, but he wasn't fired. So, in response to these kinds of things from 1937, and I do want to point out one thing in 1937, there was an investigation done, and done by then the police commission. And not by the police commission, but by city government, the mayor, supervisors ordered an investigation into corruption in the police department in 1937. And as a result of that investigation, the entire police commission was forced to resign, officers were fired, and there was a 2 million word report done about the corruption. It was lodged in the county clerk's office, and it mysteriously disappeared and has never been seen. 1937, right? So when we look at all of these, the result of the police misconduct, and by the way, the federal consent decree was as a result of a lawsuit by by community and police officers who said that the entrance exams to become a police officer were biased in terms of race, and also that the promotion system was biased, again, racially discriminatory. So that's why this consent decree came into being and lasted for 25 years. So, as a result of all of this, here's what happened. We have consent decree, lawsuits, monetary settlements, discipline of officers, some firings. There were at least 3 major exposés in your San Francisco newspaper. One going back to 1943. There was a newspaper expose on police corruption. Nothing happened. In 1955, again, this was the San Francisco Chronicle, another expose. Nothing happened. And then, more recently, the San Francisco Chronicle did a series on use of force, and this is when Chief Fong was running the department. She poo-pooed the whole series, and nothing happened. So we've had exposés, we've had city-initiated reports, the latest being this Blue Ribbon Panel report. We've had grand jury indictments of officers in which all charges subsequently dismissed. We've had police commission resignations. I'm going to have to be a little more than 30 seconds to answer the question because it was a little loaded. So, history, that's our history. So, what is the problem, the obstacles? History has shown us obstacles. Failure of leadership from the city, the mayor, board of supervisors. A politicized police commission. Problem. There is a failure of leadership in police command staff. This again, just looking at history. There is extraordinary resistance to creating transparency in policing by the Police Officers Association, by the union. Indeed, when our report came out, before the ink was dry, the head of the POA said this report was no good, entirely biased, didn't even read it. Another obstacle is the law. The Peace Officers Bill of Rights, in my view, gives too much protection, confidentiality to police conduct. And for example, body-worn cameras, the footage in California is deemed to be part of the officer's personnel file. Anything in the file is confidential. You can't see it, the public cannot. Again, that's POBAR. And finally, laws that are biased in favor of police officers when they are using force, and that's from the courts. It's from the U.S. Supreme Court. And so, what is to be done? And I'll wrap this up very quickly. There needs to be, first of all, the selection of a police chief who will bring a new, a different, and a progressive leadership to the department. 2, we need a statewide effort to revise and amend the Police Officers' Bill of Rights. 3, we need to implement every one of these recommendations that the Blue Ribbon Panel has issued. And finally, I'm going to give you this to think about. We need to start thinking outside the box. We need to rethink policing.
All right.
So we have one mindset: police, quasi-military, weapons, badges, and they have authority over us. Now, the most frequent police-civilian interactions are traffic stops that we know can turn violent, can turn deadly. Traffic stops, any of you have been stopped, particularly if you're of color, if you've been just on a traffic stop, you have fear. A routine traffic stop, you have fear. The U.S. Supreme Court has given its stamp of approval to police officers to do pretext stops. That means if they can find any reason in the vehicle code to stop you, even though they're not interested in that one tire is lower than the other, they may use that as a pretext to stop you, to then talk to you, search you, to question you. That has been given the stamp of approval by the U.S. Supreme Court. So, routine traffic stops are really, in this country, being used by police, I believe, to profile. And it's basically, they're a form of stop and frisk.
That's right.
It just has a different veneer to it. These traffic stops are really a pretext for stop and frisk. And so I want us to think about how and who should patrol our communities with respect to traffic violations. Do we need to stick with this model? I want you all to think about it.
All right.
To start the conversation going. I'm going to move quickly now to John Crew and ask him a couple of questions. John, you've been in the trenches on police practices for the ACLU for decades. What is your implementation strategy for the Blue Ribbon Panel report? And do you expect the COPS report to be less transformational? We'll let you guys know what the COPS report is in a second in John's answer, hopefully. If so, how do we avoid diluting the energies from reform if the COPS report is less transformational? So go ahead, and if you could take that away, and we will keep our timer going.
Multi-part question, so remind me if I don't get to anything. Let me just briefly start by thanking everyone for being here and just observe that the most valuable thing any of us have to do to make a difference on this issue is our time. And the fact that you're spending your time here today, it means an awful lot. The same goes for the Blue Ribbon Panel itself. The retired judges, we had dozens of downtown lawyers who volunteered their time for this effort, and we should thank them for it. They didn't have to do what they did. The San Francisco have created this wonderful new organization to try to move these issues forward. They are volunteering massive amounts of time. And finally, the families who came out and shared their story.
I'm telling you, I know.
They are not only a source of inspiration, they are a source of leadership. In Oakland right now, there is Measure Double L on the ballot. It's going to be the most important ballot measure on police reform in probably half a century. Thanks to the efforts of Rashida Grenache, who lost 2 family members to the police in Oakland 23 years ago. So we need to be inspired by their leadership, support them, and take action. The questions are, what's the implementation strategy for the Blue Ribbon Panel? Let me just say that it's important to understand what happened with the Blue Ribbon Panel report. As Judge Cordell mentioned, there was an orchestrated political attack against it. It's a long-standing game plan of the SFPOA. They don't like the message, they shoot the messenger. And they tried to discredit somehow the entire work of these very esteemed lawyers as though somehow it was politically motivated, which is completely nonsense. But let's just pretend, for the sake of argument, that it might be true. If you look at that report and 80 plus recommendations, let's pretend that 3/4 of those recommendations are politically motivated. If you look at that report, and if only 1/4 of it is true, this is one of the most horribly mismanaged police departments of any major city in this country, and it's been that way for a long time. That is actually the most painful, chilling part of their work, is just the sheer massive scope of it. It's not just hiring, it's not just accountability, it's not leadership, it's not diversity, it's all of those things and even more. So honestly, that creates a real challenge for how one goes about implementing things. And the problem in this town, as Judge Cordell illustrated for many years, it's not that we don't know the solutions, it's that we lack the political will. And so the challenge here is, how do we create the political will? And frankly, I see, and I'll try to be brief here, there are really two paths for this going forward. We're at a pivotal moment in San Francisco right now for a variety of reasons. One is they're in the process of hiring a new chief of police. The POA is running a candidate for acting chief, Tony Chaplin. Nice guy, I have nothing against him, horribly inexperienced. He would be the least experienced chief of police San Francisco would appoint in literally 60 years at a time of maximum challenge. Wow. There are extremely strong candidates in the applicant pool, outsiders who know how to do reform. The question is, will they do the right thing or not? If they do the right thing, if they hire a truly qualified national leader, someone who has stature, someone who can deal with the police union, I actually think that there is great hope for that sort of leader taking this report and running with it, right? But we don't know if that's going to happen. The other alternative is they do what this city has far too often done, hired an insider. Tony Chaplin gave an interview in the San Francisco Chronicle where he was asked, is there any problem with the culture of the SFPD? He said, no, there's no problem with the culture of the SFPD.
Yeah, thank you.
Which ought to be a disqualifier right there. Right? So, again, I like the man. I think his heart's in the right place. But it's that saying about, you know, if you're a fish, you don't know you're living in water. And if you are brought up in your entire professional life in the culture of the SFPD, you're not aware of how bad it is. And that's the great service of the Blue Ribbon panel pointing that out. And that's why there is not a city, and I'm sorry, cut me off when you want me. There is literally not a major police department in this country that has undergone a turnaround in the modern era that hasn't had an outside chief playing a role in that process. That literally has not happened. Now, some are still in the process of turnaround, but it requires that outsider perspective. We'll see if they do the right thing. The cops report, so very briefly, the community, Justice for Mario Woods, ACLU, all sorts of folks, public officials said what we need in light of all of this, all of these killings and everything the Blue Ribbon panel later documented is, we need a Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, pattern and practice investigation, which has enforcement power of federal law, and it is oriented towards that their responsibility is to protect people's rights. If your rights are violated, we're the Civil Rights Division, we're going to come and fix that and prevent that. Instead of that, what the mayor and chief serve did is, now, we don't want that. We don't want mandatory. We'll do voluntary reform. We'll do collaborative reviews, which the cops office comes in, and their orientation is not to protect civil rights. Their orientation is to give you best practices and hope that they will be voluntarily implemented. So, in fairness to the Justice Department, part of their problem is they can only sue so many places, right? So they want collaborative review to work. I honestly think it could work if we had a strong chief. But that path is going to be chosen here very quickly. And I think it's very important to keep the pressure on by advocating for all of these reforms. We're not going to get them all at once, but I've always thought that the answer to this, it's kind of the 3 Ps I call it, right? To make any progress on this issue. You need to have persuasion, you need to apply pressure, and Lord knows you need to be persistent over a long period of time. These lawyers do what they do. They have been very persuasive. Persuasion isn't enough. We need to apply pressure. I'm so thrilled that Supervisor Cohen is going to hold this hearing. It will serve the purpose of showing community concern. I encourage all of you to be there. So I don't have a clear path as to how this is going to go, but that's a preview for the future. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John.
Frederick Douglass said it best, power concedes nothing without a demand. And white male power with a shield and a gun That is one tough thing. Ray Marshall, as the lead of the very important SFPD Culture Working Group, what can you tell us from behind the blue curtain about the attitudes of the rank and file cops in San Francisco? Our sense is that the Blue Ribbon Panel, lacking subpoena power, did not get the full cooperation. The Police Officers Association approved witnesses all said, "Oh, there's no racism or bias here. We're the most diverse force in America." But the Non-Police Officers Association approved cops were all anonymous. And I might point out that when you read the officers or see the videos involved in the officer-involved shootings, it's not only white male officers. It is a diverse group of officers committing these officer-involved shootings. So can you comment on that?
Sure. First of all, let me say thanks for the opportunity to speak. And also, before responding to your question, let me acknowledge today is the opening of the African American Museum at the Smithsonian. President Obama, with those of you who were probably here this morning, did not see it, but go home and see it on YouTube, spoke eloquently about America's history and made the point eloquently that Black history is America's history. It's not the underbelly of history. It's not the aside of history. It is part of the American story. And when one thinks and can relay that to liberal, progressive San Francisco, city of love, one also has to acknowledge that this city has serious issues remaining with regards to race relations. And I've been in San Francisco since coming out of law school now, 38 years. And I've seen the change and the dilution in certainly the Black community in San Francisco, where I used to get my hair cut, no longer exists in the Fillmore district. And so there's been evolution. But to your question as to what did we find with regards to the notion of officers' view with regards to cultural bias, really, I think right away it was determined that there really is a tale of two cities within that department. And not surprising, you have some officers represented by the POA who everyone would acknowledge you have individualized bias. Obviously, that's sort of non sequitur. Yeah, there are individuals who are biased, but those groups of folks would say it's not institutional, it's not widespread. Yet, the flip side of that, you have many officers, especially those who are not as active under the POA, who would say, no, Ray, just the opposite. It goes way beyond an individual here or there. What we're talking about is systemic, it is widespread, and it is institutional from top to bottom, internally and externally. And that bias is pervasive with regards to gender, race, ethnicity, and orientation. And it affects job assignments, it affects promotions, it affects day-to-day relationships, and ultimately it affects the way that we police and interact with the community. And it started off from the very beginning. Just to put things into context, when our Blue Ribbon Panel was created, and our particular group dealt with culture. And culture is sort of like, one of those things when people talk about the other work of the panel, we were dealing with statistics, you have data, you have numbers. Well, and what we were talking about and what we were asked to do and the work that we looked at really was much more face-to-face, much more internal, talking to people, seeing the results. You can bring all the data in, which then supported what we were hearing. And what we were hearing and seeing was, especially from non-POA officials, was that people, day-to-day existence, dealt with really severe one-on-one racist activity, but yet they still went about doing their job. When we were created, we were told to go out and interview officers. We were told that we would get the support of of the police department. We were told that we should call the deputy chief of the police to set up interviews. When we tried to do that, and we did, we made calls, the deputy chief of police was not responsive. Instead, we were told to make certain that we went through the POA for all interviews. And so we called then, because we wanted to move forward with the report. From the POA, then we were told that all of our interviews with the police officers not only had to be through the POA, but they wanted counsel present. And so we then ended up having to interview those officers with POA presence, with their counsel presence, and with prepared statements prior to our being able to question them. It made matters compounded worse for us because then those officers who wanted to come forward, who wanted to be not represented by the POA, they still had to provide their names unless they were going to talk to us in confidence. And as you indicated, those who talked to us in confidence, with the exception of Sergeant Williams, who spoke publicly,
Sergeant Yolanda Williams.
Yes, Sergeant Yolanda Williams came to us in our conference room. We would meet with officers who told us in heartfelt conversations about their personal experiences and their fear of personal retaliation. Their fear that in talking with us, if it were to become public, that they fear going on the street, that where they would have the support of officers, their fellow officers, and that was regardless of color. And so it wasn't as if it was just white cops. They would fear all cops, that when they called, there would not be a response. Wow. And then when they saw how Sergeant Williams was publicly treated and privately treated within the department after she testified, that compounded matters. So there really is this notion of we, they, that still exists within the department. There are blinders between various groups within the department. And I would say, if you're looking for sort of bottom line conclusion, and we'll get into this, one of the greatest obstacles to transparency and moving forward with the department is the blurred lines and the over-position that the POA has on influence within that department. Whether that influence has been given away, whether that influence is political, whether that influence has just been due to abdication by the mayor's office, by the board of supervisors, or by others, it is no question that it has an oversized influence, and no progress is going to be made unless that issue is addressed.
Thank you, Ray. One of the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Panel is for some type of an external body to do a report on culture. We're hoping that perhaps an academic sociologist, perhaps some other outsider can come in and do a much more thorough report on culture and not have the kind of access problems that the Blue Ribbon Panel had. I'd like to move to Mawuli now, aide to Supervisor Malia Cohen. And here's the question I'd like to ask you. Malia Cohen has passed Prop D in June and has put Prop G on the ballot for November. Critics have said that they're great measures, but only baby steps. Describe the measures, if you will, and tell us how they will help. But then, as a follow-up, tell us what you think the political climate of the city is in terms of reform. Who the decision makers are, who are likely the champions of transformational change, who's on the fence, how they can be persuaded, and who will do the heavy lifting when the POA comes out forcefully against transformative change.
Okay, that's
putting you on the spot.
So first, let me also just thank the families that were here that told their stories. As Mr. Cruz said, your strength and courage is an inspiration for all of us to continue to do the work that we do, and all of the panelists up here that are fighting this fight, especially Judge Cordell, thank you. We are all working together to make this change. So let me first, I guess I'll start by explaining the various measures. Proposition D in June was pretty simple and straightforward. It simply said all officer-involved shootings must be investigated by the Office of Citizens Complaints. In the previous year, 2015, only 8 out of 37 officer-involved shootings were investigated. And I think we can all agree that if you or your family member are shot by the police, a third party, somebody should be looking into that. And of course the DA will do investigations, but as an independent third party, there was no investigations happening. So that was Proposition D. Proposition G sort of builds off of Proposition D, and speaking with folks around the city, we heard that it simply didn't go far enough, and we're getting preliminary information from the Blue Ribbon Panel report, and one of the recommendations was to have an independent outside body auditing the police department. So Proposition G would do a few things. First, it will rebrand and restructure the Office of Citizens Complaints as the Department of Police Accountability. It removes the Department of Police Accountability out of and from underneath the police department. As you can imagine, there is a conflict of interest there if the chief is the one that approves the funding for the entity that is responsible for responding to complaints about their officers. So we're taking it out of the police department budget and allowing the director to submit their budget directly to the mayor for approval. We are allowing the more transparency in the department by allowing people to track their claims. Another thing we heard was from people in June was that, I filed a complaint, but I never found out what happened. I don't know if the officer's been disciplined. They had no idea. So we are allowing people to track their claims, either calling in or logging in online to find out the status of their claim. And lastly, and most importantly, we are giving the authority to the director to perform audits at least every 2 years and on an as-needed and necessary basis of the police department on various topics. I mean, whether it's one officer performing traffic stop in a certain neighborhood, how many times a year, or are we adhering to our use of force claims? So those are the two propositions. Now, as far as them not being enough, those two measures alone, no, they are not enough. We as a city, and I'm saying this purely for educational purposes, the things I'm going to outline also are not enough. We have a lot more to do, but this year alone, stepping back a second, Mario Woods was shot on December 2nd. Before that, we had the Michael Brown killing. After that, Supervisor Cohen introduced a first of its kind in the city, and the state really data collection ordinance that requires our officers to collect certain stop data, and this data includes information on race, age, gender-related characteristics, and it makes that information public, and the police department has to report this information also to the Human Rights Commission, the Police Commission, and a few other entities. So the first report just came out about a month or so ago, and one of the most staggering statistics that we found was that out of 947 total incidences of use of force, 628 of those incidences involved an officer pointing a gun at an individual. So that is information that maybe we knew anecdotally, but information that we would not have had. So that is one thing. The subsequent reports that will be coming out in July and January will be more robust and include more information. In our budget that we passed just in June, there was $17.5 million worth of funding for police reform. This includes implicit bias training for all officers, the implementation of 21st century policing, President Obama's 21st century policing approach. There are 58 recommendations in that report, and we have accepted all 58 of those recommendations. We are implementing de-escalation policies, tactics, and training, as well as re-engineering use of force training. Body cameras. I think that is the biggest thing that we have done this year is the implementation of body cameras. Bayview Station, Ingleside Station, and the Tenderloin Station just received them about 3 weeks ago. So, I mean, that is absolutely huge, absolutely critical. There's no reason we shouldn't have had those.
So Mawuli, it sounds like Malia Cohen is going to be in the forefront of the charge on police reform. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So,
and can you tell me the other supervisors who are going to be working with her, and if you wouldn't mind, if you could tell me, where we might find some resistance, folks that we have to persuade persistently, as John Crew said.
Sure. So, I would say that Supervisor Cohen, as far as the Board of Supervisors goes, has certainly put herself out there and has been doing her best to lead this fight. It has not been easy. Anytime there's even a hint or a suggestion of change, we all know the POA sends out a newsletter and starts, flashing name calling, and I mean, Christine knows, and probably everybody on this panel knows that they have been, just completely unwilling to be a part of the process. So, I mean, I believe that everybody, all of the elected officials in San Francisco are in agreement that there needs to be change. And I think a lot of people on the Board of Supervisors, at least, are looking towards Supervisor Cohen and Supervisor Breed to lead the fight.
That's music to our ears. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And also, so just hope that everybody, so this motion that was introduced last week will be voted on Tuesday, and we hope that all of you, if you have the time, will show up on Tuesday to express your support for the full Board of Supervisors to vote to hold the hearing on October 4th. So a little bit of a procedural mess, but we hope to have your support.
I'd like to underscore that the propositions that Malia Cohen has introduced are baby steps in the right direction, but certainly not the transformative change that we need to see. The most significant, I think, of all the 81 recommendations is that we need an Office of Inspector General that continuously audits SFPD. SFPD is alone among major cities in the United States in not being audited. That was crazy when I read that there's no effective oversight body. They operate completely independently of civilian oversight. If any of you go to the police commission meetings, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And we need a much more beefed up thing than just an Office of Civilian Complaints renamed Office of Police Accountability. We need real continuous audits. I'd also like to point out that the SFPOA has nearly 2,000 members, each of whom contribute on average $150 per semi-weekly paycheck. That adds up to a $7.8 million annual budget to impede all progress, including the implementation of the use of force policy that was unanimously approved by the Police Commission in June. It's September now, has not been rolled out, and last night 42 new recruits graduated from the academy.
Montgomery, and he was able to get that cradle of the Confederacy crap off the police officers' badges. He forced his officers to go to the Rosa Parks Museum. Okay, and in 2013, he apologized to Congressman John Lewis. Okay, and he said, "I'm sorry for the ass whipping that we gave you guys." He didn't say ass whipping. I'm sorry for the butt kicking or whatever that happened, Bloody Sunday. Okay, when you guys tried to cross that bridge with Dr. King. So thank you very much.
Now to Christine Soto DeBerry, Chief of Staff, SF District Attorney. Your office has a central role to play in prosecuting police corruption and criminal use of force cases. We understand the limits imposed by legislatures and courts, but absent changing the laws at a state level, how can San Francisco make sure that rogue cops are in fact prosecuted? Please, if you will, explain the independent DA unit recently announced and tell us how it will lead to prosecutions of rogue cops. And if you could follow up on brain reform, that would be helpful. Thanks so much.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I see some familiar faces, unfortunately, of families that have suffered a very tragic loss in the audience, and I just want to acknowledge you. Les veo y les llevo su dolor en mi corazón también. So in my role in the DA's office after last year really was a big bombshell for us in our office around our relationship with the police department. And as many of you have seen, we spent about 4 years really trying to cultivate a relationship with the police department to build more transparency and share more information with us and improve our working relationship. To no real avail, and we have become, the DA himself has become sort of their #1 punching bag now for the POA. So we have like a dedicated space in their newsletter, I think, where they talk about how much they despise him. And they're trying to spread that now through other police unions around the state to get them to carry the mantra that the DA is anti-police, which is interesting since he spent 30 years in policing, but it's just part of the effort to discredit the need for reform. And the DA always says, he's a grown man, he took on the role, he can handle the mudslinging, but the problem is it really distracts us from the conversation about what the problems are and the real need for reform here. And so I hope that, because you're all here, you're smart enough to see through some of that and where we can find common ground between our office and the community. We want to find that and find ways to make things better and safer in the city. The issue that came to light for us over the past, I'd say, 4 years was our concern around how the investigations into officer-involved shootings were being done. And we had always indicated that, you've probably heard us say, we do an independent investigation. But over the years, what we've come to see is that because we're not the lead on those investigations, it's not as independent as it should be. So the lead on investigations of officer-involved shootings in San Francisco is done by the San Francisco Police Department. The OCC goes, but they are there for personnel reasons, right? To decide if the officer should face suspension or termination for their actions. But the SFPD is the lead on the criminal investigation into their own personnel, which is, you can see the inherent conflict there. And which, when you think about how that happens, then they are the ones that conduct the interviews of the officers, they're the ones that collect the evidence, they're the ones that prepare all of the evidence for us to review. And we've seen through many of the cases that family members that are here today, real problems with that, where we haven't been called out to a scene in time, where a deceased person's body has been removed before we arrive at the scene, making it very difficult for us to make our own evaluations of what has happened. So we went to the board and forewent almost any other ask we had for the office and said what we really want to do is create a unit that is focused entirely on police misconduct, that can take the lead on officer-involved shootings as well as excessive use of force cases, because we don't think the police department should run those investigations of themselves. It's just, there's too many competing tensions there. And one of the things we were trying to address, because we have heard the community say there's a lot of concern about a local DA investigating the local police department, and that we have so many that we work with them so closely on so many issues. Can we in fact be critical of them and hold them accountable appropriately? And we heard that, and we're, with the limitations of the structure, trying our best to acknowledge that and structure around it. So first and foremost, we have already offered to the Attorney General If she's interested in conducting the investigations and the prosecutions, we will happily step aside and give that space to her, because we think just in terms of the structure of the system, that would provide another level of assurance. That doesn't appear to be happening, and so without anybody else coming, we want to make sure we create a system of doing the work in the best way we know how. So we are hopeful that next Wednesday we have a hearing in front of the Board of Supervisors Budget Committee to release funding for us so that we can hire 6 lawyers and 6 investigators, so that we have a team that will work only on these cases. They won't handle robbery cases or theft cases or assaults, anything else where they would use a police officer as their witness. They'll be housed separate from the Hall of Justice, and they will work solely on cases that involve investigations of police officers and misconduct. When we get those positions, we'll be posting that search broadly. We are asking for everybody's help in helping us identify the best investigators and attorneys to staff that unit, so we will come back to you all and ask for your help in spreading the word and suggesting people that we might want to hire for that work. We're hopeful that that will bring some improvements. It is not a silver bullet, very few things in this space are, but it is an effort that we hope will pile on to other efforts around reform that should bring some, at least assurances that we are in fact conducting an independent investigation of those cases. There needs to be more work around some of the areas people have mentioned here, the Police Officer Bill of Rights, as well as the state laws and the federal standards around what use of force is appropriate. So as Karen indicated, the Police Commission passed a use of force policy that would require using minimal force, not any force reasonable in a situation, meaning if you could do less than shoot somebody, you should do less than shoot somebody. That is now in meet and confer with the POA, and we don't know how that will come out, but it is an important issue for all of you to weigh in on as a city if you want your police department to use the minimal force necessary to control a situation. That is where that starts and ends in San Francisco. And then at the state and federal level, we need to have a conversation about whether allowing people to use any force within the full spectrum from verbal commands all the way to firing their gun is appropriate, or whether we want to be more restrictive around that. And we need to be able to see, I'm an attorney, my information is on the State Bar website. If you type my name in there, it will tell you where I went to school, what year I graduated, whether I've ever been disciplined. You cannot do that for a police officer in the state of California. You can do that in most other states in the country to varying degrees. And we need to think about whether that is an appropriate way to have community oversight, agency oversight into an agency. My office has no ability to subpoena witnesses or documents unless we're investigating a crime on an individual officer. So when the racist text messages happened, we had no authority with which we could go into the police department and say, you need to tell us what's happening in here. And we were shut out the door, which is why the DA reached out to the 3 judges and all of the law firms and said, maybe you will have better luck at getting the police department to be open with you about the problems. And whether the 14 officers that we stumbled upon goes beyond that, or whether it's contained to those 14. We still don't have an answer to that question. And you'll note that none of the 14 were fired. Many people I have these conversations believe they were fired. A small handful, 2 or 3 resigned. The rest remain police officers today. Some of them earning as much as $190,000 a year, and they will get their pensions at the end of that because they didn't commit a crime for which they're ineligible for their pension. So there are many avenues to pursue reform. Personnel is a meaningful reform. If people are terminated from their job, that's a meaningful reform. They're no longer in the police department. We extract them from influencing the culture of the organization. Keeping 14 people like that harbor very explicit racist views is difficult for any organization to keep that in check and not let it spill over to other good officers or other good practices. And so we need to be very mindful about that and think about ways to reform both the personnel and the criminal sides of the work we do.
Thank you so much, Christine.
Just add that indicting and convicting the officers involved in officer-involved shootings, so there were 18 fatal officer-involved shootings under Greg Sir, and not a single one of those officers has been indicted, convicted, or even disciplined. So they're all continuing to serve as well. And the grand jury report shows that it takes on average 20 months from the time of an officer-involved shooting until DA Gascon's office issues an indictment. And yet we saw in Tulsa that the DA issued an indictment almost immediately. So we really want to see with the new investigation that results in faster indictments.
I think that's, no officer's ever been prosecuted in San Francisco, right, for an officer-involved shooting
Wow.
under an ADA. And we need to, in most places, right, as we're seeing around the country, we are not exempt. I think that should, if it wasn't clear, it should now be clear. We have not done our best work in this space. We know it. That's why we went and sought the funding, and we're really trying to be critical of ourselves. We accept the criticism. It takes us too long. All the families that are here are still waiting on a decision from us, and we know that. But sending someone from various units in our office that are trained in homicides that don't have this as their sole responsibility, it takes too long. And we can't get to the right place for people.
¿Cuánto tiempo tenemos que esperar para que se nos haga justicia?
Right. No, ese es el problema. It's long. And I know, I can't give you no te puedo decir un día en que, el próximo viernes vamos a decirte algo. Lo que te puedo decir con todo que tengo en mi alma es que estamos tratando de hacer lo máximo que podemos en investigar esto. Si no queremos hacerlo
Lo mínimo que pueden hacer es disculparse públicamente, oficialmente a las familias que matan. Y Gascón y nadie hasta ahora, a nosotros se nos ha hecho eso. Y la familia está esperando oficialmente una disculpa públicamente.
Sí.
Y eso es muy triste.
Sí.
No lo hay ni público ni escrito.
Why were the officers' pictures removed from the wall of the Hall of Justice? I went there was to identify David Goff, who murdered my son. And all the pictures were removed from the wall.
Hall of Justice?
Or the police department.
Oh, I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't work.
Because I wanted was to see the face of the person who killed my son. And that's what I'm longing for.
That
come in face to face with the murderer who murdered my son.
I'm sorry, I don't work there. I don't know. That would be a question.
This is exactly one of the most terrible aspects, is that even when the Office of Civilian Complaints does an investigation, they cannot tell the family member what happened to their child. All of that information is sealed. Senator Mark Leno tried to get a bill introduced in Sacramento that would at least open up that part of a police officer's personnel file, that when they were involved in a use of force incident that resulted in an investigation, that the victim's family, the public, would be able to see just that part of their file. That bill died in the Appropriations Committee in Sacramento, even though it didn't require any money to be implemented. That is the political power of the Police Officers Association.
Let me just comment on that as well. One of the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Panel is that to the maximum extent allowable under the law, that information will be shared with the public. That is not the case in San Francisco. We do not allow the maximum information, under the law, under the existing laws, which frankly are terrible. We do not allow the maximum information to be disseminated to the public. That has to change.
And acknowledge the families of the victims of police violence and acknowledge your courage in coming here and sharing your stories and your pain in an effort to advance justice. I really applaud your bravery. And I want to acknowledge Katie Williams, who called for people to be focused on changing the system and not just individual officers. And that's really what we tried to do with this report. We were exclusively focused on systems and what's wrong with systems that could allow bias to occur, and that's how we defined institutionalized bias. I want to share that, in my view, I think that the Blue Ribbon Panel was focused on transparency, accountability, and fairness in law enforcement. And to achieve fairness, you really need a department that's transparent enough for the community to hold it accountable. And what we found was that we're far from that in San Francisco. I don't want to rehash things that others have said in the interest of time. And there's a one-pager in your materials that should give you a summary of our panel and our process. but I encourage you to download the report at sfblueribbonpanel.com. I didn't have any initial views. I feel like we knew what had happened with the text messages. The panel was convened before Mario Woods was shot, after Alex Nieto had been shot. So we knew that use of force was a problem. We knew that officer-involved shootings was a problem. And we knew that the climate around the country was such that people were paying attention, that the media wasn't losing interest in this issue. And so we knew we had an opportunity to shine a spotlight on systemic issues within the department. But I think that any organization or any system is bound to have issues. I didn't expect that what we found would be so profound, as John Crew stated, in terms of the areas where there needs to be improvement. I'll just say that the high-level findings that I think I really want to highlight today are the lack of transparency, and a lot of that goes to what David just said. Even accounting for the Peace Officer Bill of Rights, which I believe has to be repealed to really give communities some insight into what's happening in departments. The City of San Francisco, the police department, other bodies aren't as transparent as they can be. There are ways to present information that doesn't reveal officer identifying information, which I think probably should be revealed, but until Peace Officer Bill of Rights is repealed or minimized or limited in some way, the police department, other bodies can at least share what's happening in an anonymized way or in an aggregate way, or ideally both. And so the department isn't collecting the data it's supposed to be collecting. And no one is holding officers accountable for not collecting that data. Where the department does collect data, that data is not being collected in a way that makes it easy to assess or analyze. Where the data is analyzed and recommendations stem from that, those recommendations are rarely taken up, which Judge Cordell alluded to. The second big high-level finding has to do with this lack of auditing function that Karen mentioned. San Francisco is an outlier amongst major cities in that no oversight body is really paying attention to what's happening within the department, whether officers are actually following their own policies. And so something like an Office of Inspector General, we think is exactly what's needed to be mandated to exclusively pay attention to the police department, to identify areas on an ongoing, constant basis that need improvement, and to have the authority and resources and mandate to really make that happen. Issues of bias, both against people in the community and officer interactions and within the department. Ray Marshall definitely talked a bit about some of those issues within the department. Our stop, searches, and arrests group found that, for instance, where people in San Francisco are stopped and searched without consent, Black and Latino people are searched without consent way more often than white and Asian people. And of those searches, contraband is found at way lower rates than for white and Asian people. So that's a clear example of data-based finding that reveals racial bias in the department. So what I want to share finally is just that so much of what we found is echoed by what communities of color have been saying for years, for decades, for generations. We really hope that this report can be in service to your communities, to communities that care about racial bias and other issues of bias in San Francisco. And even though it may echo what you already knew going in, there is a lot of work and data that went into supporting some of the evidence that you've known in your communities. There's also a section exclusively on community perspectives that we spent a lot of time cultivating from a lot of you, a lot of people in this audience and others, that don't necessarily have recommendations attached, but they need recommendations. And so I encourage you to look at that section and to develop recommendations that stem from that. In terms of what people need to do to really ensure that these recommendations are implemented, the Board of Supervisors hearing is a great first step, really to demand that hearing happens, but also demand that whatever comes out of that hearing is implemented. So the Board of Supervisors doesn't lose attention after that hearing, hopefully that it happens. And that even if you're not directly affected by racial bias or other bias in the city, that you are an ally to this cause. Even if in your community, police are great and they treat you with dignity and respect, unless you are an ally to the cause, nothing's going to change. So I invite you to develop those allies and to be that ally if you're in that situation.
Thank you so much, Howard. We're going to go ahead and turn it now over to audience questions. So if Bob and John would come up and grab a microphone so that we can circulate through the audience. Please keep your questions to questions and not to make long, rambling discourses that are off topic.
Any people who want to ask questions could come forward in line.
Gracias a todos ustedes por venir a ayudarnos con el dolor de la comunidad. Me gustaría saber si me puedes traducir para todo el panel.
Yes, Mr. Luis is basically saying he's very appreciative that he's here with us to finally discuss the subject matter.
Le quisiera hacer una pregunta a la juez con la ayuda del abogado porque tenemos todos aquí profesionales.
I'd like to ask some questions of the judge and the attorney here because we're all professionals.
El difunto Luis Demetrio es un emigrante indígena maya.
You mentioned the name is. Yeah, go ahead.
So Luis Demetrio Gongarapat is an indigenous Mayan immigrant.
Y lo mató la policía. Vive la madre y la viuda en Yucatán.
And the police murdered him, and his wife and his mother live in Yucatán, Mexico.
Y Luis Demetrio Góngora tiene como 50 familiares aquí en San Francisco.
And he has approximately 50 family members here in San Francisco.
Quiero saber si tenemos el derecho, la familia aquí o la mamá en Yucatán, que públicamente la policía de San Francisco internacionalmente pida disculpas públicamente, porque ni la comunidad nos han dicho nada.
We want to know if we have the right to receive a public apology, either here to the family here in San Francisco or to the mother that's in Mexico.
Who's that, Mommy? So an apology seems like an easy thing to do. But if you're asking a governmental body, police department, a city, to issue an apology, they will, in all likelihood, never do that because of the concern that once the apology is out, it's an admission that the city government department has done something wrong, something that needs an apology, which opens the door to litigation. So unless the apology came with a condition that said, we'll give you an apology, but you better not sue us, then I don't believe an apology is forthcoming.
Que ellos mataron a mi primo.
What do we have to do to receive justice for Luis Demetrio Gongarapat? Because I've publicly accused them of murdering him.
Yes.
I would just say you may not have a legal right to an apology. You absolutely have a moral right. Part of the problem, probably the main part of the problem, in the San Francisco Police Department and with the SFPOA is their continuing defense of the indefensible. Instead of doing the human common sense thing, we make mistakes, we're going to learn from them, do something about it. They defend the indefensible. Your family member was lost, and within the same day, the POA publicly claimed it was a valid shooting, when we all saw the videotape that clearly it wasn't. We just very briefly compared this, what happened to your family member, to what happened in Milwaukee. As you know, and I'm sorry to go through this again, officers arrived at the scene, came out of their car, and within seconds, started firing beanbag rounds, and seconds after that, killed your family member. That is the opposite of what their policy has required for years, that they use time and distance and de-escalate. And I understand the district attorney investigation takes a long time. They're working on making it better. But there's also disciplinary accountability. A very similar situation happened in Milwaukee sometime in the last year or two. A homeless man who was approached aggressively, supposedly created a risk. The officer shot them. The police chief, Flynn of Milwaukee, didn't wait for the DA's investigation. He fired that officer. He said, you do not get to create the risk that justifies the deadly force. Even if at the moment you shot, there was some threat. If you created the threat, you shouldn't be a police officer. That's what San Francisco Police Department has not done. They don't need to wait for the end of the DA's investigation. Their policy for 5 years has said, use time and distance, don't rush. And it's a horribly avoidable, tragic loss that is completely indefensible. And absolutely, not just you, the whole city should be demanding an apology.
Muchas gracias. Y la familia sigue sufriendo y esperando justicia.
Here we go. First of all, thank you to all of you, and thank you again to the families. So I'm going to be speaking a little bit out of frustration, but it's not because I don't appreciate what you're doing here. And my question is to Christine DeBerry. Thank you to your office for convening this panel, first of all. But here's some frustration. So when it comes to charging officers, as we know, no officers have ever been charged in any killing. That's shameful. And you know, what we're told over and over again by your office is that it's because of all the legal constraints, for example, the police officer's Bill of Rights, things like that, that prevent the DA from filing charges. And in addition to that, the DA must have a reasonable conviction that he can, in fact, get a conviction of the officers if he does file. And that means it's got to be beyond a reasonable doubt. Each member of the jury has to be 99.9% sure that the officers are guilty. And if he can't meet that very high threshold, then he cannot, in fact, file charges. So my question is, if those, in fact, are all the constraints, is it ever even conceivable, under the circumstances, for any officer who kills somebody to ever be charged?
We don't want a society where the government is killing people. We don't. I don't believe in the death penalty. I don't believe in it happening as a result of a court hearing or on the streets. And it is a terrible, terrible loss. And I have family that I love so much, I can't imagine that situation. And I hope that everyone here knows that I go to work every day very committed to making things better. And the DA goes to work every day. We are desperate to make things better for all of you, for all of us. We're part of this community too. I have 2 beautiful brown children that I don't want to ever lose. Soy de Guatemala. I have my blood myself. Like these are not things that we want to see happening, and I see the humanity of every single person here and the pain that you're dealing with as a result of these. And it doesn't change anything for you, but I am so sincerely sorry for your losses.
I'm so tired of crying. I'm so tired. I'm so fed up.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to acknowledge that. I know it doesn't change anything you're feeling. But I do want to address the question that was asked.
I want to see David Goff. That's what I want to see. I want to see David Goff. I want to come face to face with him. I want to see what he looks like.
So the law in this country is very difficult. The Police Officer Bill of Rights has nothing to do with whether we can prosecute a police officer for a shooting. That has to do with disciplinary issues and other things. So that is not a limitation for us in this space. The limitation is what the Supreme Court has said is permissible for officers to do. They are, when they perceive a threat to themselves or their partner or the community, justified in using lethal force. And that is a very broad, big standard for them. So even in situations where they create the threat by closing a gap with an individual or getting more aggressive in a situation, they can still resort to that claim of fear, and the Supreme Court has said that that is justifiable. So it is very difficult. Now, I don't mean that to say it's impossible, but it is very difficult. In many of the factual scenarios we see, in many of the cases that are here, where we all see that something else could have been done, you watch the videos and you say, that didn't need to happen, that does not make it illegal. And it is an extremely frustrating situation for us and for everyone here, that not everything that is horrific and unnecessary is illegal. But that is the truth of the law the Supreme Court has laid out for us. And I think as a community, one, you should be coming to us and saying, do as much as you can, as often as you can, as forcefully as you can. And I think that is a very fair thing to lay at our doorstep. But I don't want to leave you with the sense that just demanding that of us will change it, right? So that there also needs to be change in the laws around what type of force is appropriate and necessary and how we want to be policed. Right, and Judge Cordell said at the beginning, we've got to really think about how we want to be policed as a country. And if you don't think that African Americans are the canaries in the coal mine, then you should pay attention, because coming to a neighborhood near you is this kind of aggressive policing. And if we don't want that as a society, as one of the great democracies, those are my beautiful babies right there. If we don't want that for our community, then we have to say we want different, and we have to demand that there be changes in state legislation, federal legislation, that we tie federal funding and say if your police department doesn't have a minimum use of force standard and start eliminating force, then you won't receive these federal grants, because we want to support the departments that are policing their communities humanely. So there are ways that we can work together to change some of those things, and the things that are the responsibility of the prosecuting agency, you should continue to bring to us and demand that we do our jobs.
Let me just add one thing on this. Justice Sotomayor on the U.S. Supreme Court wrote this fabulous dissent in a case involving policing. So the Supreme Court went and did what the majority does, which was find, again, on more bias in favor of the police, but she wrote this incredible dissent. And I say this to you because oftentimes the dissents change the minds as the court moves on. If we want to have like-minded people on that court when vacancies open up, please vote in November. We need a Supreme Court that is moving in the direction that Sotomayor, I believe, is going to take that court at some point. So please, those people who think about sitting this one out, not real excited, get excited, because everything is at stake. The trajectory of policing is at stake in this country at this election coming up. Please vote.